Hey guys, tonight we tiptoe into a tale so quietly ridiculous, so utterly celestial in its farm animal absurdity, that it might just rock you to sleep faster than a lullaby sung by a god with a lyre made from turtle shell. We're visiting the world of ancient Greek myths, the dusty corner usually filled with epic battles and scandalous affairs. But tonight we zoom way in on a sun god who, for one very peculiar episode, got demoted to a glorified cow sitter. You're probably picturing Apollo right now, gleaming in gold, hair perpetually windswept, radiating pure main character energy. And you'd be right, normally, but not in this story. In this story, Apollo ends up sulking in a pasture, counting cows that refuse to behave, while everyone else on Mount Olympus carries on being fabulous and problematic. It all begins, as these things tend to, with sibling rivalry, divine mischief, and the kind of cosmic parenting that makes you wonder how Olympus didn't collapse under its own drama. Oh, and a baby, an actual baby, steals sacred cows. You probably won't survive this myth if you're expecting logic, because the gods operate in pure dramatic symbolism. Also, you probably wouldn't survive Apollo's babysitting technique either, which mostly involves yelling at animals and threatening them with sun rays. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The story opens, as all proper divine soap operas should, with an argument on Mount Olympus. You've seen heavenly disputes before, thunderbolts, passive-aggressive banquets, maybe someone shape-shifting into a goose. But this one involves property theft. Cow theft, to be precise. Apollo, sun god, music genius, archery king, and all-around golden boy, storms into the high halls of Olympus, half fuming, half muttering about missing livestock. His sacred herd, the glorious cattle he keeps in the plains of Pieria, has vanished. Poof, gone. Mooless meadows. Apollo, as a rule, doesn't do chores. He delegates. So the idea of personally counting cows already rubs him the wrong way. But now he's got to investigate a bovine heist. This is where you come in. Not to help, of course, just to watch him trudge around looking irritated. Because watching a sun god throw a tantrum over stolen cows is surprisingly entertaining. Historians still argue whether Apollo's herd was literal livestock or symbolic of something more abstract. Solar cycles, cosmic order, etc. But tonight, let's just accept there were extremely fancy cows with some celestial sparkle and a deep fear of being grilled. The suspect list is laughably short. There's one standout, Hermes, the newborn god, as in less than a day old. But when you're born on Mount Olympus, you hit the ground running. Literally. Hermes, son of Maia and Zeus, entered the world with a wink and an escape plan. So, as Apollo fumes, we rewind just a little. Back to the moment little Hermes decided day one on Earth was the perfect time to start a life of divine trickery. You might think a baby god would nap. Hermes decided instead to invent theft. He wriggled out of his cradle in a cave, because of course he was raised in a cave, toddled into the world, and spotted Apollo's cattle. And instead of drooling like a normal infant, he quietly whispered, "Mine," and then stole them. But Hermes didn't just drive them off the divine lot. No, he invented misdirection, reverse hoof prints, confusing trail loops, possibly even cow stilts, though historians still argue whether this was metaphor or actual Olympian technology. This is where Apollo's irritation begins to simmer into full-blown god rage, because the irradiant, poetry-blessed, sun-chariot-driving deity has been bested by a newborn in a blanket. You can practically see Apollo's golden aura flickering in disbelief. You follow Apollo through groves, past olive trees, into meadows buzzing with bees, and finally, into a quiet clearing where he hears music, a strange, sweet strumming, gentle, foreign, new. It's Hermes. He's sitting there, less than 24 hours old, plucking strings on what appears to be a turtle shell. Yep, the lyre. Hermes invented it. From an actual tortoise, which means tonight's myth includes both instrument making and cow kidnapping. Try finding that combo on Netflix. Apollo approaches, frowning. Hermes plays, smiling. There are no cows in sight. Where are my cattle? Apollo demands. I'm but a baby, Hermes replies, totally not answering. Apollo knows. Hermes knows he knows. And you? You know this is going to be one of those days. Despite the tension, there's something weirdly peaceful about the moment. The strumming of the lyre, the way the light filters through the trees, the faint sound of lowing in the far distance. Because Hermes did hide the cows, just not well. Apollo, for all his divine fury, doesn't incinerate the baby. That's growth. And maybe, just maybe, that music touches something ancient and soft in Apollo's heart. Maybe, or maybe he's just too baffled to act. So he does what any self-respecting immortal sibling does. He tattles to Zeus. You trail behind as the two gods ascend to Olympus, one smug, the other steaming. The halls of Olympus echo with arguments, accusations, melodic diversions, and Zeus rubbing his temples like a single dad dealing with two overgrown toddlers. And in a moment of either justice or comedy, honestly, same thing on Olympus, Zeus declares that Hermes must return the cattle. Apollo, in turn, must accept the lyre as a gift of peace. And to balance things out, Apollo has to babysit the herd he was so desperately attached to, which means Apollo, a literal sun god, gets promoted sideways into divine cow sitting. Congratulations. You've officially entered the laziest divine punishment ever invented. And this is where your journey begins in earnest. You'll trail Apollo through long, dull, dusty days. Cow watching, cow sighing, Apollo composing poetry about hoof patterns, and wondering how his life reached this point. But hey, at least there's music. So now you find yourself drifting along behind Apollo as he squints into the noonday sun, a tad ironic, since he is a noonday sun, and mutters under his breath about divine injustice and bovine flatulence. You follow him out to the pastures again, this time not as a god on a mission, but as a reluctant herdsman, ankle-deep in mud and cow pies, grumbling like a teenager grounded on prom night. You'd think a god with celestial responsibilities might protest this demotion more loudly. But Olympus operates on petty justice, and Zeus found it funny. Apollo loses cows to a baby? Fine. Apollo becomes a cow's babysitter. That's balance, at least in the warped household of immortal deities. He settles into the tall grass with an exaggerated sigh. The cows move softly in the background, chewing cud with all the enthusiasm of hungover brunchgoers. Apollo glances at them with the disdain of someone raised in golden halls and perfumed temples, now stuck supervising animals with no sense of rhythm. This is where things slow down, really slow down, because gods may live forever, but they are not built for boredom. Apollo tries to entertain himself. First, he attempts to compose a new hymn to the cows. It includes some forced rhymes. Oh, creature divine / you stink like old wine. It does not go platinum. Eventually, he takes out his lyre. Yes, the one Hermes gave him, and strums it absently, perhaps hoping the vibrations will hypnotize the herd into behaving. The cows are unmoved. One of them, he's named it Artemumus, out of sheer sibling spite, kicks a rock into his shins. Historians still argue whether Apollo's cowherding gig lasted days or years. Greek time is elastic like that. But the general consensus is this. For a while, the god of prophecy and sun rays lived a slow life. And not by choice. You can almost feel the weight of those sunlit afternoons. The way the air sticks to your skin. The soft buzz of insects moving lazily between wildflowers. The occasional low grunt from a cow who's forgotten how to cow properly. And in the middle of it all, Apollo, arms crossed, glaring into the distance like he's performing in a really moody indie music video. There's a quirky moment one afternoon when Apollo tries to name all the cows. He gets about 16 and before losing track, partly because they all kind of look alike, and partly because he starts assigning names based on ancient philosophical terms. Plato, Socrates, Mutinus. You almost admire the effort. Almost. By twilight, the cows begin migrating back to their pen, mostly on their own, which is both impressive and insulting. Apollo trails behind, playing a dramatic chord progression to signal the day's end. It's a bit much, but he's used to being worshipped by choirs and flutists, not outmaneuvered by hoof mammals. At one point, A mortal stumbles into the field, a farmer, lost or curious. Apollo startles him simply by existing too brightly. The mortal drops his satchel of turnips and flees in terror, shouting something about divine wrath. Apollo considers going after him to clarify. Then he remembers he's technically grounded. So instead, he eats a turnip. It is tragically raw. The cows don't care. They're already lying down, having philosophical conversations and moos, probably judging him. This strange pastoral period in Apollo's life becomes a kind of accidental sabbatical. He begins to reflect, not just on Hermes and the stolen cows, but on his place in the world, which sounds very deep until you remember he once turned a mortal into a tree just because she wasn't interested in dating. Still, Apollo grows slightly less insufferable out here. The lack of attention does wonders for his ego. The clouds don't clap when he speaks. The grass doesn't part when he walks. And the cows? They couldn't care less if he invented poetry or sunlight or Monday morning melancholy. One of them, a particularly stubborn heifer he's named Mullany, keeps wandering off to nap in the woods. Every time he chases her back, he trips over his own robes. At some point, he finally just lets her go. Freedom is its own punishment. Fringe mythologists, yes, those exist, actually believe this whole episode was a cleverly disguised rite of passage. That Apollo had to humble himself through manual labor before taking on his more famous roles as god of healing, prophecy, and awkward musical contests with satyrs. It's an odd theory, but not entirely implausible. After all, there's something undeniably grounding about tending to creatures who neither praise you nor fear you. Cows don't lie. They don't flatter. And they don't really notice when you burn a hole in the grass out of boredom. So you watch as Apollo begins to soften, if only slightly. He stops threatening to smite the occasional bee. He teaches himself new scales on a lyre. He hums lullabies to the calves when they seem agitated, not out of affection, just because it's less annoying than their incessant bleating. There's even a whisper of contentment in his gaze as he watches the sun set, the skies slowly painted in oranges and pinks that mimic the hues of the cows' hides. The irony doesn't escape him. He is the sun, and now he's watching himself set. And yet, in that stillness, he finds something useful. The gods don't often slow down. Their lives are filled with petitions and prophecies, and egos the size of empty Etna. But here, in a field of slowly digesting cows, Apollo begins to realize he can be more than a celestial overachiever. Not much more, but still. So when Hermes visits again, popping into the pasture like a toddler who just remembered he left his shoe somewhere, it's not with taunts or giggles. It's with curiosity. Still cow sitting? Hermes asks. Apollo nods, flicking a pebble at his baby brother's sandal. Learned anything? Apollo pauses, thinks, then shrugs. Don't name them. You'll get attached. Hermes, being Hermes, immediately tries to ride one. It does not go well. But before leaving, Hermes plays a little tune on a panpipe he's just invented. Because of course he did. And the two gods share a brief, almost human moment. Music, cows, and a sunset. No curses, no thunderbolts, no divine decorations. Just quiet. And you, drifting slowly through it all, feel your own mind ease into a softer rhythm. The sun lowers. The cows sigh. And somewhere in the background, a god learns to be slightly less dramatic. You're still ambling to the pasture. Only now it's dusk, and the mood is shifting. The cows begin their slow, lumbering trek back toward the pens, chewing methodically like they're processing ancient wisdom, at about one thought per minute. Apollo trails behind them with a stick he doesn't need, but uses dramatically, pointing at stragglers like a Shakespearean actor unsure whether he's a shepherd or a war general. This is where the story takes a weirder turn, as if divine babysitting wasn't enough. You see, Hermes isn't done, not by a long shot. He's barely started. In fact, and baby gods, they don't exactly mature like humans. They escalate. Hermes, growing bolder by the hour, decides it's time to push his prank artistry to new heights. Sure, stealing cattle was fun, but what's better than a prank that affects a whole mythological ecosystem? He invents lying. Yes, really, according to some fringe myth fragments. Hermes may have been the first liar in existence. And not just a little fib, like, I didn't eat the ambrosia. No. Hermes invents lying as a concept, possibly while holding a beetle and convincing a turtle it's a god in disguise. Now, historians still argue whether Hermes genuinely invented lying or just perfected it at Olympian scale. Some suggest deceit already existed, but needed a patron. Others think this myth was really just an elaborate way of saying, look, even the gods weren't above making stuff up. But back in the field, you feel that shift in the air. Apollo is beginning to suspect something's off. His sun-powered instincts are tingling. It's like when you lose your phone, but know it's been moved even though everything looks the same. He counts the cows again. Then again, one is mooing weirdly. Another seems smaller than yesterday. A third is suspiciously shiny. Turns out Hermes didn't just steal cows. He might have returned a few with minor edits. One's fur is painted. Another has flowers woven into its tail. A third now answers to Greg. Apollo narrows his eyes. It's not quite rage, but it's close. He doesn't know what Hermes has done, but he knows the vibe is wrong. And gods live off vibes. Literally. Sometimes, remember Dionysus? Yeah, that's a whole other bedtime tale involving wine fountains and questionable theater. Anyway, Apollo decides to investigate. You follow behind as he leaves the cows to their chewing and stalks toward a trail of suspiciously clean footprints. Tiny sandal prints, no larger than the squirrels, but smug. Smug footprints. The trail leads him to a cave. A small one, decorated with a few odds and ends. A broken lyre string, half a tortoiseshell, and a diagram of something that might be a juice press or might be a slingshot. Hard to tell with Hermes. The cave smells faintly of goat and mischief. Hermes is inside, reclining like he owns the place. He's chewing on something that might be honeycomb or a rolled-up map of Mount Olympus. He looks up, sees Apollo, and doesn't even flinch. "Oh, hey," he says, like Apollo hasn't just tracked him across meadows and a moral plane of existence. "You want some cheese?" Apollo says nothing, just raises an eyebrow with the slow fury of someone who's memorized 67 names for the sun and is about to weaponize all of them. But Hermes, ever the improviser, launches into a performance worthy of an award. He swears he's innocent. He says the cows wander on their own. He even blames a rogue satyr. Because let's be honest, blaming satyrs was practically a sport in ancient Greece. He tells Apollo that the herd must have eaten psychedelic thyme and rearranged themselves for fun. That maybe the stars did it. That maybe Zeus did it as a lesson in humility. Apollo listens, and listens, and listens, then finally speaks. "Did you lie to Zeus too?" Hermes shrugs, only when he asks questions. Somewhere in the background, the cow named Greg lets out a sneeze that sounds like divine judgment. Apollo winces. There's a strange stillness now, as if time's holding its breath. Then, slowly, Apollo smiles. A dangerous smile. The kind of smile gods reserve for plagues and poetry contests. "You know," he says, voice soft, "mortals sacrifice to me for justice." "Mortals sacrifice to me for good luck," Hermes replies, unfazed. It balances out, and in that moment, something changes. Maybe it's a truce. Maybe it's mutual recognition. Or maybe it's a shared understanding that both are trapped in a myth that's part nursery rhyme, part philosophical prank. Whatever it is, the tension deflates. Apollo sighs, dramatically of course, and sits down beside Hermes. The baby god offers him something from a jar, honeyed olives, probably stolen, and they share a quiet moment amid the wreckage of bovine mischief. Back at the pasture, the cows have begun a minor rebellion. One has climbed halfway onto a boulder and refuses to come down. Another has figured out how to moo at the exact frequency that vibrates Apollo's lyre. Mullany is missing again. Presumably, she's formed a commune in the woods. But none of that matters right now. Because here, in this tiny cave, something mythical is happening. A god of reason and order and a god of trickery and chaos are finding middle ground over snacks and passive-aggressive conversation. It's a small thing. But then again, so was the first lie. And look how far that went. Outside, The stars begin to blink into view. A lazy breeze stirs the leaves. The cows chew in rhythm. And the world, absurd as it is, continues turning. You let out a slow breath, and your body begins to follow the cadence of the myth, meandering, odd, and stubbornly peaceful. One cow lets out a sneeze so thunderous, it startles a nearby owl. Hermes snorts. Apollo rolls his eyes. And you? You smile in the dark. So now you're sitting beside two gods who, let's be honest, are barely managing to stay in the same myth without breaking into a full sibling-style wrestling match. Apollo's golden curls are glowing faintly in the moonlight, and Hermes is still chewing, slowly, like he's delaying a truth he has no intention of sharing. The cave is still. That is, until Apollo looks around and finally notices the liar, not his liar. A new one, different, stranger. It's small, rough, and still has bits of tortoise shell stuck to it. Like Hermes couldn't quite be bothered to clean it properly. But there's also this bizarre charm to it. String strung with sinew, a crude wooden frame carved with absolutely unnecessary swirls. It looks like a child made it during detention at Divine Daycare. You can tell Apollo is trying not to be impressed. But you can also tell he is impressed. He raises an eyebrow at the baby god, who looks back, innocent as a swan in a thunderstorm. You made this. Hermes nods, mouth still full. Out of a turtle? Another nod. A slow silence. Apollo reaches for it, plucks a string, and the sound it makes, well, let's just say it shouldn't be that good. It's like the air itself pauses to listen, like the sky leans in, surprised. The notes hang in the cave, dancing off the stone, impossibly lovely for something so utterly ridiculous. Apollo scowls. This is unacceptable. You can't just make music gods. That's my thing. Hermes licks his fingers. I can make more if you want. Now, mainstream myth tells us this moment was pivotal. Hermes playing a liar for Apollo to smooth over the whole cattle theft thing. But less mainstream scrolls, written in sleepier corners of the ancient world, say something stranger. That Apollo wasn't just impressed. He was moved, as in emotionally, which, for Apollo, is basically the equivalent of crying at a toothpaste commercial. Historians still argue whether this was an early prototype of diplomacy by music, or just Hermes being too adorable to stay mad at. Some go as far as to say this exchange planted the seeds for future mortal philosophies, truth and trickery harmonizing into something unexpectedly beautiful. You sit and watch as Apollo gives in. He listens, then takes the lyre, tunes it, because of course he tunes it, and begins to play. And suddenly, you're not in a cave anymore. You're in sound. The music lifts you out of your body, into a warm, golden swirl of notes that feel like sunlight melting over honey. You feel your limbs go heavy, your thoughts drift, as the melody folds over itself, building, relaxing, dissolving. Even Hermes looks sleepy, eyes half closed, hands tucked behind his head. The cows, you'll be delighted to know, are also listening. Somehow, from the pasture, a few have wandered closer, heads tilted in bovine awe. Greg is drooling. Mulaney's commune has collapsed as her followers gather near the cave like a sacred concert audience. But before the moment can become too sentimental, Hermes ruins it. As expected, he lets out a very deliberate, very cheeky yawn. Nice tune, he says. Little derivative. Apollo stops playing. A pause. A divine eyebrow raise. And just like that, the spell is broken. Still, the seed is planted. Apollo, for all his heavenly ego, recognizes something crucial. Hermes is useful in a chaotic, extremely inconvenient way. And while his methods are ridiculous, his results, well, speak for themselves. So Apollo makes an offer. A trade. He'll forgive the cow theft. All of it, if Hermes gives him the lyre. Hermes, naturally, pretends to think about it. Picks at his nails. Drums on his knees. Hums a random melody that might be hot cross buns, if you squint. Finally, he shrugs. Sure, I've got 6 more in progress anyway. And just like that, history bends again. You may not realize it, but you've just witnessed the birth of musical diplomacy, the divine version of a peace treaty passed with string and sound. And Hermes? He doesn't lose anything. He gains everything. Apollo softens, Zeus stops being annoyed, and Hermes gets a formal title. God of boundaries travelers, and now, clever little troublemakers with good marketing instincts. Back in the cave, the two gods lean back against the rock wall. Apollo is strumming absent-mindedly. Hermes is already inventing the next thing in his head. It might be sandals with GPS or an underworld delivery service. Hard to say. Outside, the cows begin to moo again. Loudly, persistently. Apollo groans. I guess that means we're still responsible for them. You are, Hermes grins. I'm just the idea guy. Cue the divine eye roll. But there's no smiting, no thunder. Just a soft strum of a new lyre, a herd of semi-enchanted cattle, and two immortals learning, slowly, sleepily, that maybe being stuck together isn't the worst thing. You curl a little deeper into your blanket, eyes heavy. You're feeling what those cows must be feeling, chewed out, moonlit, and weirdly at peace. And honestly, if Greg can get through all this, so can you. The next morning, the kind of mythical morning where dew sparkles theatrically and birds are a bit too punctual. Apollo rises first. Of course he does. He's the sun god. Waking up is literally his job. You, on the other hand, are groggier. You feel like you've been herded by cows in your sleep. Because you have. Hermes is curled up on a rock, snoring like someone who spent the night composing 5 more string instruments out of found objects. There's what looks suspiciously like a harp made of antlers near his feet. The cows? Well, they're awake. Fully. Loudly. Greg is trying to eat the lyre. Apollo sighs. What am I supposed to do with you? It's unclear if he means a cow or Hermes. And this, dear listener, is the beginning of Apollo's babysitting arc. Now, this part of the myth is often glossed over or conveniently edited out entirely. Why? Because nothing truly epic happens. No lightning bolts, no monsters, just cows and divine irritation, which is exactly why it's perfect for bedtime. See, as part of the new divine understanding, Hermes convinces Apollo that these cows, his cows, require care, constant care, around-the-clock, moo-based maintenance. You can't just smite your way through responsibility, Hermes says, sipping something suspiciously herbal. That's very 500 BCE of you. And for reasons known only to the Fates and perhaps a board of celestial content creators, Apollo agrees. So he tries. He herds. He sings lullabies to restless calves. He brushes tangled tails and invents a divine version of cow yoga. You witness it all. One moment, Apollo is serenading a calf named Steve with a gentle ballad. The next, he's arguing with a group of cows who refuse to walk in a straight line unless he feeds them ambrosia-infused hay. You're not even sure that's a thing. But here we are. Historians still argue whether this phase of Apollo's life represents punishment, penance, or simply the ancient equivalent of a cosmic internship. There are fragments of scrolls that imply Zeus was using it as character development. Others say it was just Hermes' idea of a very elaborate prank. Either way, the transformation is real. Slowly, grudgingly, Apollo learns patience. Not from the heavens, not from oracles, but from Greg, who once sat in a stream for 6 hours and refused to move unless Apollo hummed the exact right chord progression. There's also an incident involving cow-themed performance art. Don't ask. And there's Mullany, the self-appointed bovine poet. She begins composing odes to Apollo's golden hair. Loudly, constantly, her fans follow suit. By day 5, Apollo has a fan club made entirely of cows. It's adorable and deeply unsettling. At one point, you spot Apollo seated cross-legged in the field, eyes closed, a flower crown resting precariously on his head, as 10 cows surround him in a meditative circle. It's unclear whether this is enlightenment or surrender. You settle into a nearby patch of shade and watch him wrestle with the divine truth. Babysitting is hard. Even if your babies weigh 1,200 pounds and think chewing sandal straps is a sport. Hermes, meanwhile, checks in periodically. He never helps, of course. He just appears, snacks in hand, to observe and chuckle softly like a podcaster with exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Occasionally, he leaves cryptic advice carved into trees. Try mooing back. It builds trust. Cow sense shame. Be shameless. If all else fails, bribe them with figs. That last one weirdly works. It's during one particularly chaotic afternoon, as Apollo is being chased by a calf with surprisingly sharp teeth, that Hermes appears with what might be considered divine reinforcements. Or just weirder cows. He's found new ones. Ones from distant mythic meadows. A cow with 2 heads. One with feathers. One who claims to be Athena in disguise, though Apollo is 80% sure she's bluffing. You lie back and stare at the sky, listening to the chaos unfold. Mooing. Lyre twangs. Apollo yelling something about boundaries. It's all oddly relaxing in a mythological sitcom sort of way. And then, a quiet moment. Sunlight spills across the pasture in golden beams. The cows are calm. Finally, Apollo sits in the middle of them, face flushed, robe grass-stained, but somehow at peace. He plucks at his lyre. Not to impress, not to show off, just to soothe. You realize he's humming the same tune Hermes played in the cave. Slower, softer. A cow sighs. You sigh. The field seems to hum in reply. And you get it now. Why the gods need myths like this. Not everything is war and fate and thunderbolts. Sometimes it's about learning that you can't control everything. Not even a herd of cows. Especially not a herd of cows. Apollo glances your way. You've been oddly quiet. You shrug, just observing. He chuckles. Welcome to my life. You lie back and let the grass cradle your head. The music floats upward, mingling with the breeze. You start to think that maybe, just maybe, Olympus is the one place where a sun god and a trickster babysitter can raise cattle together without the universe collapsing. At least for now. The peace, of course, doesn't last. It never does when cows are involved, and especially not these cows. By now, you've accepted that Apollo's divine herd isn't so much a group of livestock as it is a roving performance troupe with opinions about everything, from grass flavor to dramatic lighting. One morning, you wake up to find the cows have formed a union. They've elected a leader. Her name is Belladonna. She wears flowers behind her ears and speaks exclusively in haikus. No one knows where she got the clipboard. She's drafted a list of demands for Apollo. Item 1, longer grazing hours. Item 2, more lyre concerts. Item 3, absolutely no more sun cherry overhead before 10 a.m. Apollo stares at the parchment, blinks twice, and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like, I miss plagues. But instead of throwing a thunderbolt or turning them all into shrubs, he sighs and does the unthinkable. He listens. See, at this point, Apollo has grown different. Not soft, exactly, but maybe less bronze statue perfection and more frazzled summer camp counselor. He's developed the kind of patience usually reserved for kindergarten teachers and gods who've seen things they can't unsee. Like a cow, try to put on sandals. You watch him gather the cows, address their demands, and even host a democratic forum. There are scrolls. There are speeches. Greg the cow is now Greg the treasurer. Mulanese start a poetry slam. The pasture becomes a full-blown republic. Historians still argue whether this was the birth of early bovine governance or just Hermes messing with the natural order for fun. Either way, it's weirdly beautiful. And of course, Hermes shows up just as Apollo is explaining the concept of majority rule. He leans against a tree, tossing olives into his mouth and smirking. You're welcome, he says. Apollo glares. This is your fault. Hermes shrugs. Growth is uncomfortable. Also hilarious. You're starting to suspect that this entire cosmic sitcom was Hermes' master plan from the beginning. Not just a prank, but a myth-long experiment in character development. You almost admire it. Almost. The cows, for their part, are thriving. They've organized a talent show. Greg juggles apples. Belladonna performs her haikus to a standing ovation. There's even a brief interpretive dance number led by 3 calves and a slightly confused sheep. And Apollo? Apollo hosts, in a robe covered in hoof prints. He bows to his audience and announces each act with the resigned dignity of someone who once presided over temples and is now being heckled by livestock. You sit beside him as the evening winds down. The sky turns peach and lavender. The air smells of crushed herbs and cow breath. And even though no one will write epics about this, no one will sing of Apollo's time as cow wrangler supreme. It might be one of the most human things he's ever done. He leans back in the grass, arms behind his head, eyes following a lone cloud. I used to think music was everything, he says. Now I think maybe it's just part of the story. You don't reply. There's no need. Instead, you hand him a flower crown. He rolls his eyes, but puts it on anyway. Suddenly, the ground trembles. It's not an earthquake. It's worse. It's Zeus. You recognize that thunder-inflected clearing of a throat anywhere. A shimmer of clouds parts above the pasture. And there he is, draped in stormlight, beard immaculately curled, holding what might be a lightning bolt or a particularly angry candlestick. Son, he booms. Apollo bolts upright. Father, you've domesticated my cows. Apollo opens his mouth to argue, then closes it, then shrugs. Technically, Hermes' cows now. Zeus narrows his eyes. He looks at the cows. The cows look back. Belladonna offers him a copy of the new pasture constitution. He takes it. There's a moment of pure silence. Then Zeus laughs. It's a booming, thunderous, terrifying laugh, but it's laughter. He claps Apollo on the back, so hard God nearly falls into a daisy bush. I haven't seen a myth this ridiculous since Dionysus tried to invent glitter wine. He says, well done. Hermes appears again. Of course he does, with a bowl of olives and a look of smug satisfaction. Told you, character growth. Zeus raises an eyebrow. And you didn't orchestrate this whole thing out of sheer mischief? Hermes shrugs, entirely unconvincing. Divine mischief is a misunderstood art form. You're not sure whether you just witnessed a celestial reconciliation or an immortal roast, but it ends with Zeus handing Apollo a new lyre, crafted from starlight, polished with thunder, and tuned to absolute perfection. I think, Zeus says, it's time you return to Olympus, but take the cows. Apollo blinks. What? You heard me. They've unionized. You're their god now. You think Apollo might actually cry. A single tear of golden resignation. Mullany moves dramatically. The cows are going to Olympus. And somehow, so are you, because if you stuck around this long, through poetry slams, cow-led governments, and divine babysitting sagas, then you're basically part of the myth now. So you pack your things, mostly a blanket and a few very opinionated cows, and prepare for the next chapter. Whatever it is, it's sure to be weird, mildly sacred, and sprinkled with just enough tomato-level chaos to keep you yawning. But first, there's a cow talent show finale to attend. And this time, Greg juggles fire. So now you're ascending to Olympus with a herd of cows in tow. You wouldn't have believed a week ago, but here you are, trudging up an ancient celestial staircase paved in moonlight and metaphor, right behind Greg the cow, who insists on narrating each step aloud for morale. He's also chewing on a cloud. It's unclear whether that's allowed. Apollo walks beside you, still wearing the flower crown. The lyre Zeus gave him is strapped to his back, gleaming like a comet. Every few steps, it lets out a melodic ping, like it's stretching its strings after a nap. Try not to stare at anything too divine, he mumbles, which is hilarious advice from a guy who glows in the dark. Olympus looms above, carved into the very sky, its columns of ivory and opal shimmering with casual godliness. The gates are guarded by two sphinxes doing crossword puzzles. They barely look up as you arrive. You nod respectfully. One of them offers Belladonna a pencil. She accepts with a curtsy. And just like that, you're inside. Olympus is weird. You expect grandeur, yes, and there's plenty of that. Ceiling frescoes that animate themselves, wine fountains that pour in rhythm to lyre music, and a suspicious number of statues of Zeus that appear to have been sculpted by Zeus. But it's also unexpectedly chaotic. Dionysus is dancing on a table. Artemis is throwing arrows at a dartboard. Hera is organizing a polite but intense spreadsheet competition. One of the muses is doing karaoke. The song, Don't Stop Believin', in Latin. Hermes winks as you pass. Welcome to the neighborhood. Apollo mutters something about how this is why he never brings guests. But the cows? The cows fit right in. Within minutes, They wandered off into the Olympian Gardens and started an herb appreciation society. Belladonna has been offered a part-time job as Athena's poetry editor. Mullany is teaching a yoga class. Greg has discovered escalators. Historians still argue whether the cows ever technically left divinity, or if they were always destined for this weird, celestial upgrade. Some claim Hermes was elevating their status all along. Others think it was just a very long prank with a strong second act. You, meanwhile, are shown to guest quarters so plush they might be alive. The pillows hum lullabies. The sheets smell faintly of ambrosia and sun-warmed scrolls. You don't even bother questioning it anymore. Apollo, now freshly robed in gold-trimmed silk, is summoned to the Olympian Council meeting. Naturally, you tag along, if only to see what divine bureaucracy looks like. Zeus sits at the head of the circular table, leaning back at his throne like he's auditioning for a Thunder-themed cologne ad. Beside him, Hera is reading a 7-foot-long scroll, sipping judgment from a chalice. Ares is sharpening a spoon. Athena's owl is taking minutes. First order of business, Zeus intones. Cows. Apollo raises a hand like a student. Yes, they're mine now. There's a long pause. Then chaos. Dionysus claps and yells, "Finally, we can start the bovine opera." Artemis wants to know if they can be trained for moon-based rituals. Hestia is already baking them commemorative bread. You watch this unfold with the quiet resignation of someone who now fully understands how myths are made. Not in fire and conquest, but in endless committee meetings and elaborate potlucks. The council debates pasture zoning laws, cow choreography for festivals, and whether Greg should be allowed to speak during ceremonies. Greg objects. Loudly, a vote is taken. Greg wins. He thanks the council with a mu haiku, and somewhere in the midst of this nonsense, Apollo leans over to you and whispers, "I think I'm okay with this." It's not the life he envisioned. He was supposed to be all golden glory, prophecies, music, perfectly toned calves. His own, not Greg's. But something in him has softened. Maybe it was a union. Maybe it was Belladonna's poetry. Maybe it was being humbled by tomato-level humility. Historians still argue whether this moment marked a permanent change in Apollo's divine character arc, or if it was just a mid-immortality crisis with cows as therapy animals. Either way, something shifts. Later, you stroll the gardens while Apollo plays his new lyre beneath a silver apple tree. The cows gather around, munching contentedly, occasionally harmonizing in low, melodic moos. The stars above seem closer tonight, like they're leaning in to listen. Greg lies beside you, chewing cud and humming. "So, when do we get statues?" You don't answer. You just close your eyes, let the music and the cloud-scented breeze wash over you, and think that, just maybe, this is as divine as it gets. No one throws a tomato. Not even one. And that, dear listener, might be the most mythic miracle of them all. A week passes on Olympus, which may actually be 3 centuries in a nap. Time's a little fuzzy when you're sharing elevator rides with eternity. You've adapted alarmingly well. You've got a routine now. Morning tea with Athena, served by a lightning-powered kettle. Cow cuddles at noon, and divine gossip hour with Aphrodite, who has very strong opinions about Greg's new hat. The hat is purple, and velvet, and possibly enchanted to moo when it detects flattery. Meanwhile, Apollo has stopped brushing his hair quite so symmetrically. That may not sound like a big deal, but for a god who once refused to be photographed next to Helios because the lighting was off, it's seismic. He seems looser somehow, less celestial influencer, more golden retriever with a harp. And speaking of harps, the lyre Hermes made is now the center of Olympus's hottest new trend, divine jam sessions. Every night, gods, nymphs, and one very persistent dryad gather to play, sing, or dramatically recite things that sound like slam poetry, but might actually be ancient curse recipes. The cows naturally are stars. Greg's soulful bellowing has become the bass line for Olympus's first funk ensemble. Belladonna provides haunting background hums. Mullany's interpretive mood dances have sparked a movement. Literally, there are workshops now. Ares signed up ironically. But here's where it starts to get complicated. Because Olympus? Not everyone's into change. You first notice it when Hera side-eyes the cows during brunch. Not her usual judgy glance, the one reserved for mortals who try too hard, but something a little colder, a little less mythic. She's whispering to Zeus. Zeus, in turn, furrows his brow so deeply it could host a farming cooperative. That afternoon, a scroll is posted on the ambrosia board. New divine code of conduct. Cow clause addendum. You read it aloud. No hooves on the central dais. Mooing prohibited during lightning council. All cow poetry must be pre-approved by Apollo or an Olympian with at least 4 epithets. Greg gasps. Censorship. Apollo is outraged. He storms into the Pantheon kitchens to yell at someone, possibly a sentient jar of olives. You trail after him as he paces. They're not just cows anymore, he mutters. They're artists. They're sacred companions. I mean, Mullany taught Demeter downward dog. Historians still argue whether this was the start of the Great Olympus cultural rift or merely one of many petty divine squabbles, like the time Hermes patented sandals with winged arch support. But things escalate. First, the cows are moved from the main temple garden to an approved pasture space, which is just a flowery way to say divine backyard. Then someone removes Belladonna's haiku from the council pillar. Worst of all, Greg's hat disappears. He files a formal complaint. In verse, Apollo tries to stay calm, but calm has never really been his core setting. Soon, he's petitioning for official recognition of bovine beings as culturally significant semi-divine entities. He drafts a motion. He prints pamphlets. He hires a choir. And you become the accidental press secretary. You're the only one who speaks both mortal and moo. During interviews, you phrase things carefully. No, we're not asking for cows to replace Eros. Yes, they bathe regularly. No, Greg did not curse the figs. That was Hermes, as a prank. Meanwhile, factions form. Dionysus, Hermes and Artemis? Pro-cow all the way. They've launched a movement, complete with togas made of ethically sourced wool. Hestia joins quietly, offering warm biscuits at every rally. On the other side, you've got the traditionalists, Hera, Athena, though she secretly likes Belladonna's rhyming couplets, and Zeus, who mostly just grumbles and throws lightning at the sky for emphasis. Apollo, caught between worlds, begins to lose sleep. Not that gods need sleep, exactly, but he's been skipping his sun chariot runs, and the other day you caught him feeding a daisy chain to a confused satyr while sighing dramatically. I just want to babysit the cows, he groans. Now I'm leading a civil rights campaign. You pat his back. Well, at least you're growing? He glares at you, then sighs again. It's a very musical sigh. Historians still argue whether Apollo truly believed in the political side of the cow cause, or if he simply got swept up in the aesthetic revolution. Either way, he starts wearing looser robes and quoting Greg in council meetings. One evening, the tension breaks. An official proclamation echoes through Olympus. Effective immediately, all non-divine beings must vacate the celestial plane unless granted specific mythic exception. Greg's ears droop. Belladonna stops composing. Mullany lies down and refuses to moo. Apollo storms out of the meeting. You follow him into the courtyard, where the constellations shimmer in quiet solidarity. We have to leave, he says finally, or fight. But if we fight, he trails off, because fighting gods, not really a winning strategy, even with really persuasive cows. You look out over Olympus, where Greg's hat has been spotted atop a statue of Zeus. The symbolism is not subtle. We don't belong here, Apollo says. Not yet, maybe not ever. So the decision is made. You'll return to Earth, but not in disgrace. Oh no, in style. There will be music. There will be flowers. There will be an exit parade with interpretive cow ballet. Because if you're going down, you might as well go down mooing. You wake up before the stars have packed away their glow, your blanket of starlight slightly crinkled, your dreams still echoing with bovine poetry, and Apollo humming something suspiciously close to lo-fi beats to mourn divine disobedience. Preparations for departure begin quietly. The cows don't moo. Not even Greg, who once mooed at a passing cloud because it looked judgmental. Instead, there's a solemnity in the way they move. Heads bowed, tails tucked, their usual theatrical flair now reduced to subtle grace. Belladonna leaves a single flower on the ambrosia board. Mullany smears celestial mud on her hooves in a silent protest. Greg, he's composing a farewell ode in minor mu. You pack only the essentials, a half-full scroll of haikus, a bag of ambrosia-flavored cow treats, and weirdly, an autographed harp string from Hermes that says, "To my favorite mortal plus part-time bovine diplomat." Apollo doesn't say much. He spends a morning sitting in the meadow, sunlight cascading off his golden hair in lazy, molten waves. He's holding the lyre, not playing, just holding. When the moment finally comes, he turns to you. "We'll use the back gate," he says. "Less drama." You nod, even though secretly you were hoping for drama, maybe a sky banner, or a celestial flash mob. But no, this is Olympus, not Broadway. Actually, wait, same difference. As you lead the cows through the garden of golden apples, the statues seem to bow just slightly in your direction. You wonder if you're imagining it, or if maybe even marble has moods when the sun hits just right. One dryad gives Greg a daisy chain. He tries to move casually, but accidentally cries a little. You pass Hermes on the way out. He winks. When this makes it into the myths, make sure they spell my name right. There's no official goodbye from Zeus, but a thunderclap in the distance sounds vaguely like good riddance, or possibly send more figs. Then you're gone, back on Earth. Sort of. You land not quite where or when you started. The sky is softer here. The grass smells old. There's a village in the distance, and a theater tucked into the edge of the woods. The cows settle instantly. Mullany starts choreographing. Belladonna begins writing again. Greg finds a flat rock and declares at the stage. Apollo, still clutching his lyre, looks around. "It'll do." He doesn't say it with much enthusiasm. More like a man who just got relocated from a 5-star resort to a mid-range Airbnb and is trying to be polite. But slowly, things begin to bloom. You help build a little amphitheater out of mossy stones and leftover ambition. Locals wander in, drawn by the sound of Apollo's music and the mysterious flyers Hermes keeps accidentally dropping from the sky. Soon, people are coming from towns over. They sit on hay bales. They bring baskets of dates and wine and offer awkward compliments to the cows. Greg becomes a minor celebrity. A traveling bard writes a song about his hat. And one night, as you watch the moon rise over the meadow stage, you realize something astonishing. The cows are happy, not just content, not just well-fed, genuinely, deeply, soulfully happy. Even Apollo seems lighter. He still gets broody, especially when the audience doesn't clap on beat, but he smiles more. He starts adding mortal instruments to his repertoire. At one point, he even considers joining a jug band. You talk him out of it. Barely. One morning, a messenger arrives. Not from Olympus. From Delphi. You're summoned. Apparently, mortals have been whispering about a strange golden man with a harp and cows that moo in rhythm. The oracle wants answers. And possibly tickets. Apollo sighs. Do I have to be mysterious? Or can I just show up and sing? You shrug. Your brand. Your call. So, the two of you, plus the cows, begin the journey. Through rolling fields. Over lazy hills. Past small towns where children throw petals and ask Belladonna to autograph their tunics. At Delphi, the oracle greets you like old friends. She's chewing on something suspiciously fig-like and eyeing Mullany with mild reverence. You've disrupted the pattern, she says to Apollo. It needed disrupting. He raises an eyebrow. You're not mad. Oh, I'm furious, she says, but also entertained, which is rarer. The oracle makes you tea. She offers Apollo something cryptic involving a glowing spoon and a prophecy written in interpretive dance. But he declines. Politely. Too soon, he mutters. You sleep that night under olive trees. The stars are gentler here. Closer. Almost warm. Historians still argue whether this period, known in some fringe scrolls as the pastoral pause, was a literal chapter in divine history, or just metaphorical fluff invented by poets who like cows too much. But for you, it's real. You live the days slowly. Help Apollo build instruments. Teach the cows to bow. Train Greg in dramatic monologue delivery. Not easy. His mooing range is impressive, but diction? Less so. And just when you think life couldn't get any stranger, it happens. A new traveler arrives. She's tall, mysterious, draped in shadow and silk, and just enough menace to suggest either villainy or high fashion. Possibly both. She walks right up to Apollo and says, "You forgot your responsibilities." You blink. Apollo doesn't. "Hello, Artemis," he says. Turns out, she's not thrilled with the sabbatical. Also turns out, she has opinions about cows. But that's a story for the next field trip. You barely have time to blink before Artemis steps fully into the clearing, her presence like a cool breeze cutting through the warm meadow air. She's the sort of goddess who doesn't waste words or time. You can almost hear the echo of her arrows whistling past, even though she's standing perfectly still. She eyes the cows as if considering whether to hunt them or adopt them as celestial pets. Spoiler, probably both. Apollo's eyes flicker with a mix of guilt and stubbornness. "I needed a break," he says, trying to keep his voice light, but there's an edge of defensiveness there. You know him well enough to see it. The kid who's been handed the world's responsibilities and just want a nap or maybe a hobby. Instead, he got stuck babysitting cows. Artemis steps closer, folding her arms. You were supposed to watch over flocks of the wild, not domesticate them into a stage act. The cows, sensing tension, shuffle uneasily. Greg snorts, clearly considering making a run for it, but Belladonna gives him a pointed look, and he settles back down with a resigned moo. You chime in, trying to keep the peace. Apollo's been trying a new approach, mixing divine duty with a bit of creativity. Artemis raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Creativity is fine, but responsibility comes first. The wild is in theater. Apollo sighs. Maybe the wild needed a bit of theater. You're reminded of those fringe myths suggesting that God sometimes takes sabbaticals, not out of laziness, but because even immortals get burned out. Historians still argue whether these divine pauses were literal events or just metaphorical stories to explain periods of change in nature and culture. Artemis doesn't reply immediately. Instead, she gazes out over the meadow where the cows are beginning a clumsy rehearsal of what might someday be called bovine ballet. Mulaney's hoofwork is surprisingly elegant, and even Greg's dramatic flair has improved. "You've turned the wild into something domesticated," she finally says. "But maybe there's a lesson there." Apollo looks relieved. "That's what I've been trying to say." You notice a faint smile tugging at the corner of Artemis's lips. It's subtle, like a secret between old siblings, but it's there. Then, without warning, she pulls an arrow from her quiver and taps Apollo lightly on the shoulder. Back to work, but perhaps with a little more balance. Apollo grins, the kind of grin that says he's plotting his next creative break already. "Deal." You exhale, feeling the tension lift like a morning fog burning off the fields. It's like the gods themselves have their sibling squabbles, just with more cosmic consequences. The next day, Artemis joins the rehearsals, teaching the cows how to leap gracefully, not away from hunters, but toward the light. You catch Apollo attempting a dramatic bow alongside Greg and Belladonna, who are now practically celebrities among the local villagers. Artemis's presence brings a new energy. The wildness returns, but it's tempered with a playful spirit. The meadow feels alive in a way it hadn't for a long time. You wonder how much of this will make it into the myths. The mainstream stories focus on battles and heroic quests, but maybe the real magic happens in these quieter moments of balance and creativity. One night, as the campfire crackles, you and Apollo sit watching the cows settle down under the stars. Greg hums softly, a tune he apparently learned from Apollo's lyre, and Belladonna nuzzles a calf named Echo, who is convinced she's a goddess in training. You realize this very long nap wasn't just about rest. It was a transformation, a lesson in patience, in humility, in finding joy in unexpected places. Historians still debate whether Apollo's babysitting escapade was a deliberate myth or a poetic metaphor for a larger cultural shift, perhaps the taming of nature through art and ritual. Whatever the truth, you feel lucky to have been part of it. A quiet chapter where even gods learn to laugh, to dance, and to care for a herd of cows that changed the course of divine history, one moo at a time. As the sun rises again over the meadow, you notice the subtle changes in the landscape. The grass seems greener, softer beneath your feet, as if the divine attention and bovine rehearsals have coaxed it into a better mood. Even the bird song feels less frantic, more like a gentle morning playlist than a frantic scramble to greet the day. You can almost imagine the gods themselves are leaning in closer to listen. Apollo, now thoroughly invested in his newfound role, has taken composing melodies inspired by the cows' movements. The cows, surprisingly cooperative, shuffle rhythmically to his tunes, creating an impromptu pastoral symphony that echoes through the valleys. It's like a cosmic jam session, where even the wildest creatures learn to keep time. You watch as Belladonna leads a slow-motion parade, each hoof-step timed to Apollo's lyre. It's charmingly absurd, like a bovine ballet troupe auditioning for a divine talent show. You chuckle to yourself, imagining the skeptical looks of other gods if they could witness this low-key chaos. Historians still argue whether these pastoral performances were purely myth or they represented early rituals blending nature, art, and spirituality, sort of like the world's first farm-themed musicals. Either way, it's clear that Apollo's approach softened the harsh edges of divine duty. One particularly quirky tidbit you can't ignore. Some local folklore claims that Apollo's cows could predict the weather by their mood swings, with grumpy mooing signaling incoming storms. It sounds ridiculous, but considering how deeply intertwined ancient peoples were with nature's rhythms, it might hold a grain of truth. Meanwhile, Artemis has taken a back seat, but keeps a watchful eye from the tree line, occasionally offering pointed advice or an encouraging nod. Her relationship with Apollo feels less like rivalry now and more like a well-rehearsed dance, sometimes stepping on toes, but always in sync at the end. You find yourself musing over the symbolic significance. These two siblings, representing contrasting aspects of nature, the wild and the civilized, the hunter and the caretaker, have found common ground in the most unexpected way. A herd of cows that refuse to be just ordinary animals. Remember how Apollo's laziness sparked all this? Now it's clear that even the gods need breaks, creativity, and a bit of humor to keep the universe spinning. Maybe that's the real message hidden in the myth. Balance, even for immortals, is key. As you sit back, letting the gentle hum of the meadow lull you, you realize that this boring story about babysitting cows is actually a quiet celebration of patience, adaptation, and finding wonder in the mundane. The cows finish their rehearsal, lying down in a contented heap as Apollo strums a soothing tune. You smile, feeling the calm wash over you like a warm blanket. Historians still debate whether these moments of divine whimsy were historic events or poetic inventions, but to you, they feel like little secrets whispered between the stars.